Danny Montooth spent several years as a puppeteer and puppet specialist at the Disneyland Resort in Anaheim, California. He is also a creator of and puppeteer for Perception Studios, which streams weekly live on Twitch. I talked to Danny Montooth about working for Disney, his thoughts on live streaming, and his jobs working on commercials, movies, web series, and more on this episode of Under the Puppet. You're listening to Saturday Morning Media. And now, back to our show. Welcome to the show that is preserving puppetry through the personal stories of professional puppeteers. My name is Grant Pachoco, and this is Under the Puppet. Danny Montooth, welcome to Under the Puppet.
Oh, thanks. That's a very short introduction. I was like, hi, thanks for having me.
It's a pleasure. No, we get the introduction out of the way so we can just start talking.
All right.
And I always like to start these interviews by asking, do you remember the first time you saw puppets? The very first time you ever saw puppets?
First time I ever saw? For me, the distinction is when I knew it was a puppet versus like years later being like, there's a man under there. I think the first one I ever saw was probably Sound of Music, the marionettes in that, because I think we watched that to death in my house because we're kind of a musical theater family.
Yeah, The Lonely Goat Herd was so captivating. I know for me as a kid, I was a little bit like, what? I don't know what this movie's about. But then as soon as those puppets, it was like, bang.
Yeah.
I love this sequence, yeah. Were your parents creative growing up? I mean, you said you're a musical household. Were your parents and your family creative?
Yeah. Neither of them professionally, though I think both of them probably could have been. Like they met doing musical theater in high school. Like my dad was like Finch in a production of How to Succeed, and but he stayed doing like local theater stuff, like community theater stuff at like Long Beach Playhouse and everywhere. So he's a very, very strong singer, strong performer. And my mom would dance. My grandmother owned a dance studio, which is kind of where I learned that I wanted to perform, but I wanted no one to look at me ever. And, you know, we were also the family. It's like we had to be forced to sing like Christmas carols at the table at Christmas and stuff. And it was not great for anyone involved, but we did it.
Well, and it's interesting because saying that your dad was, kind of involved in the Long Beach Playhouse, it's like you're sort of still involved in productions in Long Beach and stuff like that. So it's kind of this history of performing in that area.
Yeah, no, I loved getting to actually perform there for the first time because I saw him do all kinds of shows there, and I've only ever done 2 to my recollection. One was like a staged radio play forever ago, and then the last one we did together, and that was super fun.
Yeah, which we'll get to that one puppet show.
Yeah.
But I read an interview with you, and now you are a puppeteer, and you're also a voiceover artist, and you narrate audiobooks and stuff. But sort of these things all sort of came together at a very young age watching cartoons, right?
Oh, 100%. Yeah, I had that revelation moment kind of all across the board, all at the same time. It was, I think it's like Batman the Animated Series, specifically like Mark Hamill Joker being like, holy crap, that's a man. And that's a man that I know as doing something else, but he's doing this thing and bringing the best character ever to life. And then around the same time, I started seeing behind the scenes stuff for puppet things. And I was like, all of it. It's all exactly what I love and what gets me excited. So,
yeah, and you were kind of playing around with puppets at a young age too, right?
Yeah. My the first puppet I ever owned, I named him Climby. He was like a Folkmanis black bear that was a souvenir from Yosemite because my family used to go camping all the time, and I just never put the thing down. I just kept making him like climb up people's arms. I tore the seam in his mouth so I could give him a little tongue, like just cute stuff. And and if I had a stuffed animal, I had like a snowman that would make ice skate across like dining tables and stuff because it was fun.
And you dabbled a little bit in ventriloquism too, right?
Oh, I was so bad, but yes, I did. On my 9th birthday, after much begging, because I really wanted to get into ventriloquism, I was like, this is what I want to do. I want to do this. So they got me the pull string at the neck, Charlie McCarthy, and the Paul Winchell VHS, Ventriloquism for Fun and Profit, which I still own. I think it might be the only VHS I still own. And I would watch the hell out of that thing. And not just for, the ventriloquism stuff was very clear in that, which I liked a lot. Like, he broke it down. He had animated diagrams as, where to put your tongue and stuff. It was very helpful. I just still wasn't strong at it. But he was also a tremendous puppeteer. I think there are a lot of ventriloquists who aren't necessarily excellent puppeteers, and he is both by far. And so it was fun watching him like show off little like character isms with like characters like Tessa and Jerry and all these things, and Knucklehead, of course, who I love. Yeah, it was terrible. And then once I realized I wasn't a good ventriloquist, I used it to torture my sister. I hung Charlie by the drawstring on the ceiling fan. I would tuck it into her bed. It was mostly vengeance. She usually earned it, and she would agree. She's
So
old.
that's the fun part of Fun and Profit, is torturing your sister.
Yeah.
And in high school, I mean, this is kind of, you were talking about, watching animated shows and voiceovers and things like that. In high school, you started looking into doing animation, right?
I did, yeah. So, like a lot of things in my career, I do things backwards because I get excited. So, my very first art class ever was an animation class in high school. They offered one. I couldn't not take it. I was obsessed. I was like, I want to make my own cartoons. I want to do the voices for them. I want to do all these things. And then I was like, okay, I can kind of draw, but I sure can't animate. Like, I can't stay on model. I'm not consistent enough. I'm not patient enough with myself to do, 72 frames per second or whatever. I was like, nope. Like, learned that I loved it, similar to like dance. I was like, okay, I learned that I love things about this. I love drawing and designing and doing all that stuff, but doing the same character over and over and over again, couldn't handle it. But yeah, and I feel like all puppet things were born out of that desire to want to do cartoons because they're the same thing in my brain. It's just real-time animation. It's the same logic most of the time. Not all the time, but most of the time, at least the stuff that I get to play with.
Is there any sort of correlation that you see? I mean, you're saying that like puppetry is sort of like you're doing live animation, but is there anything that maybe you learned studying animation that helped you with your puppetry?
Absolutely. And this is like a fun full circle story that I only realized not, fairly recent, in the last couple of years. So just jumping forward in time a little bit, Chuck Jones, right? The best, just
Sure.
the best, right? Squash and stretch, and like the timing on that guy, and like knowing when to do a mild look, when to do like the most minuscule amount of motion to make a joke land, or that kind of like visual punctuation, right? Beautiful master of animation. And I'd always be like, hey, when I'd be teaching at Disney, I'd be like, hey, go home, watch some classic Chuck Jones cartoons, go watch some Looney Tunes. And then years later, I found out that he was a puppeteer before he was an animator, and that broke my brain because it was like all the things about like adding weight and doing all this stuff. I'm like, oh, because he did it the other way first, so he's just great at everything apparently.
I don't think I knew that. I mean,
Yeah.
I of course know who Chuck Jones was, but I didn't know he was a puppeteer.
Yeah.
I'll have to look into that. Well, and you mentioned Disney, and I assume still while you were in high school, you got a job at Disney, right? Can you tell us
Yeah.
about how that came about?
So the summer of my junior year, my sister, it was the 50th anniversary for the parks. And my sister, the same one I tortured with the dummy, that's Angela, she, of course, knew that I was a puppet nerd. By then, my collection had grown. I wasn't particularly good at it. I just really enjoyed it. I loved it. And so if I saw one that I liked, I had that same model that Nina Conti, yes.
Yeah.
So I had that same monkey, and when she started taking off, I was like, wait a second. And I looked down, but mine had a little Scottish outfit on. Anyway, so she comes back to me, and she's like, hey, nerd, they're having puppet auditions for Disney. You should go. And I was like, all right. I didn't have a job, and I had no prospects. So I was like, why not? So I went, and it was amazing. The people who auditioned us were, I can't remember everyone, but I remember John Addis was in charge of the show. And he was like the director for the whole thing. And he was just awesome because he was excited to see people excited to do this thing, right? And I was having a great time. I had a puppet on my hand, and he's like walking around looking up at us and like just seeing us try, right? So I got cast 5 days a week as Ursula for the parade, which is a giant 2-person Michael Curry puppet, which was just awesome. Put me into the best shape of my life because he used every limb and everything the entire 45 minutes plus show stops and heat and all those things. So like you'd sweat everything out. You're at the best shape of my life. The next year I just kept doing it. So in my senior year I took the last 2 periods off. So I'd finish school and then go straight to Disney to do a couple parades and then not do my homework because I was a bad student. I was great with puppets eventually.
Do you think theme parks, if they have puppetry, and hopefully some of them do, are a good place for puppeteers to kind of hone their craft?
Holy moly, yes. Cannot recommend it enough. I think I had great mentors there, great teachers there. So the main 2 that trained me up were Greg Ballora and Tommy Fountain. And what I loved about working with both of them is they're very much opposite methods, right? So Greg is very analytical. He'll tell you like it is. He wants it clean. He wants it sharp. Like, and he'll tell you why. But I'd say he operates a lot like a user manual or a textbook. Like there is a right way and there's a wrong way. There's a clean way and there's a funny way, right? Because he's still a performer. He's an actor and all that stuff. So it's like if you need things explained, he's your guy. But then if you're like an emotional performance type person, Tommy Fountain would come in and like, no, you just gotta like feel the music, feel the breath. And he was very movement based. He had a background in figure skating. And like both of them, tremendous puppeteers. And like if you watch them both just play, you're like, oh yeah, all right, I could get there someday, you know? And so they were great. And also we had the specialists at the time. So we had like Art Vega, who now I work with all the time, and a couple other folks who really helped make me not suck. It was an amazing time to be there because I went from parades where the puppets are a little more, I guess, not non-traditional. So it was hard initially to translate what I learned from those into, you know, the hand and rod stuff, which we got to later. But like, there's no better team, and especially at the beginning there were no better tools because that first wave of puppets were all built by either Henson or Puppet Heap, and they were gorgeous and they felt great, they moved right, and like, you know, that kind of stuff, you don't realize how lucky you are until years later and you're starting to work with like other things made by other people. And you're like, what happened here? Yeah, no, Disney was a great training ground. And like anything though, it's like you still have to dedicate yourself to it and really work on getting better and cleaning up what you're doing. And because there are some performers who just floated through because it was just their 9 to 5. They go home, whatever, same thing every day. But I was very, very intent on becoming good at it, because I liked it a lot and I wanted to like, you know, emulate the people who inspired me to start in the first place.
As somebody who I also worked at Disneyland for a while, not doing puppets, I worked in attractions, but also in sort of a performance thing because I did Jungle Cruise for many, years. And I also know that, when you're on your 20th trip of the day, of doing the same thing over and over again. And I know that in the puppetry world, it can kind of be the same thing. It's like where you've done your third parade of the day, or you're doing your third, your 10th show of the day, or whatever. How do you prevent yourself from getting bored and just getting your mind wandering when you're doing the same thing over and over and over again?
I will say I was not immune to going into autopilot a few times. I think it happened to everybody. But I mean, the cast was also wonderful. Like, we all got along after the shows, between the shows, and then we'd find kind of games to play within the show, being like, all right, today, Smee smells bad or whatever. That's a terrible example. I don't think that one ever happened. But like we'd find a way to keep ourselves entertained without breaking the show. So it's like we're doing the big performance stuff, but then we have subtler stuff like under that level and like little isms that we can only really read from each other because we've been working together for so long. So like it becomes very fun. We had jokes for every line that was in the show, and it was so loud. We could say whatever we wanted down there, and we usually had a punchline for every line in every version of every show. But yeah, I think it's just finding the play in the work and finding the work in the play, and just don't go too far over. We're also guilty of that sometimes, but overall, I think we turned out some good shows. Yeah, and I think every time is an opportunity to do it better. And that is true, right? There are some things that were just always just, stuck in my craw of like, I can't get this one thing pretty. And then eventually you get it pretty and you're like, all right, good. I'm glad I didn't give up on it because now I got it. Now I nailed it. So I think that's it, right? It's like, if it's good, you can still polish it further, right? If it's great, you can still polish it further. There's no such thing as a perfect show, but you can get it as close to your version of that as you can.
And you certainly, in that situation, like a theme park setting, you have the opportunity to polish because you're doing a ton of shows a day, a week, a month, and everything. So, what other, you mentioned you did Parade, but what other shows were you working on while you were at Disney?
Okay, so we did Playhouse Disney Live on Stage, which was puppet stuff, Disney Junior Live on Stage, which was puppet stuff, and then I also did the Jedi Training Academy, and then the second iteration, which is Jedi Training Trials of the Temple, or JT-TOT for short, because no one wanted to type that out. And yeah, that was pretty much it. I also did, atmosphere stuff as well, off and on throughout the time. I didn't do that as often. And I get real sad when they'd send me to Goofy's kitchen. But, it was all still work, and it was fun. And especially when I was doing shows, I kind of would occasionally like that change of pace where it's like, all right, there's no pressure. I don't have parents threatening to punch me in the face. This is a good time.
Can you talk a little bit about the puppets, the different styles of puppets, like for Playhouse Disney,
Sure.
the many iterations of that? But what style of puppets were those?
They were primarily hand and rod, but we had some nice, beautiful, like mechanical rod puppets as well. My favorite has been and will always be Bear. Being able to perform Bear in the Big Blue House was awesome, and I'm sure people listening to this know Bear, but Bear is so cool. So he's a full body suit. He's built on kind of like a 45-degree angle, and I know the one on the show, he had a monitor in his chest so you could see what the camera saw. But for our version, his eyes were cameras, and we had these like military grade goggles on so we could see what Bear sees. So we're like 7.5 feet tall, no depth perception. And if you see Bear walk, he's got a really strong, like side to side, like kind of fall because he's a little, not dopey, but just, casual, right? So because of that, like you have to learn to not get nauseous real fast because your whole world in your eyes is just going from side to side to side, and you're avoiding trap doors and trying not to trip on other performers or crush the casey. And sometimes the battery would go out, so you'd just be blind and hope for the best. We had one like catch on fire once.
Oh man.
Yeah, it's great. Mostly hand and rod were on these stools for like characters like Tigger and Goofy because they were taller. They were on these. They had these lap bars so we could hold them up higher and carry some of the weight. But they bike brake mechanisms and gimbals and triggers and buttons and things like that to make things go. No buttons, but lots of triggers.
And how many like for Playhouse Disney Live, how many shows would you do a day on a shift?
Ooh, we would do anywhere from 5 to 8 if you were very, very unlucky. But usually we do 5 because we would have a couple swings during the day. So we try to average 5. Some people would do 6, and it would be an 8-show day. Unless my brain broke and it's been long enough that I've forgotten. There might be 2 more or 2 fewer than that, and I cannot recall anymore.
Yeah. And how long approximately were like the shows, like 15 minutes or
like
20?
20-ish.
Yeah.
Not quite a half an hour, but under that. And like if you were under the stage, like Bears had it very difficult in a completely different way. But if you're under the stage, it's a marathon. Because like you're done with the character, you chuck it, you throw the next one on, and you go back up. And like that's the amount of time that your arm is down is just a swap. And occasionally you would get to go from a character to being an assist and doing arm rods for another puppeteer. Sometimes you'd just be on a prop. You're like, I get to help with a fishbowl or whatever. Like, but you always had to be ready. And then the next show, you'd probably be doing one of the harder ones. So we would try to balance out the ones that were more physically taxing and try to make sure people were only doing like 2 or 3 of those a day and then doing 2 or 3 of the easier tracks a day.
Did you ever, while you were there, because I'm trying to remember the timeline of when they took it out, but did you ever get to do Sweetums in Muppet Vision 3D?
No, I didn't. I got to teach it, and I think I eventually got signed off sort of by default, but yeah, I never did it.
Oh, okay.
I'm very sad.
Because that's just a fun little Muppets thing in the park.
Yeah.
Did you ever get to do any of the, because I know that over the years they've had different versions of some of the Muppets in the park. Did you ever get to work on any of those?
I did. That was a highlight of my life, actually. So we did, California did, or Disney did this thing where if you were a California resident, I believe, if you volunteered a day, you get a free day at Disney. That was the campaign. They used the Muppets for that. So the Volunteers Pre-Parade Cavalcade, I believe, was the full name of the event. And we had to train with the current Muppet performers who were those characters at the time. So it was Eric Jacobson and Steve Whitmire, which, me still being young, dorky puppet boy, still am. But like, I was just like, I'm not ready for this. It was fun. We had an audition for it, and we got to, some of us got to do it, which was really cool. My weird, surreal moment there was, at least during rehearsals, we got to use actual Muppets. For the show, they used these scaled-up versions built by a different company. So Steve's at the mirror. He's got Kermit on his hand. He like looks at me. I look at the Kermit on the chair because there's another Kermit, which also brain breaky for me. I'm like, of course there's more, but you don't expect to see them all in a pile somewhere. And he's like, you want to go pick that one up? I'm like, okay. So I want to pick it up. And my favorite thing about that whole process, though, like we got to watch some cool like internal videos from Jim just kind of saying like who these characters are. Like this is how they behave. And it was just neat. It was like just little character bios spoken by him, which were beautiful. And I wish I had a better memory. But my favorite thing about that whole thing was watching Steve and Eric kind of teaching themselves how to teach, because I don't think they'd done it very often, especially for their own characters that they've held on to for so long. So I remember like Steve's like looking at his own Kermit in the mirror being like, 3 nods. Yeah, I guess I do 3 nods, right? Yeah, sure. Like, and so I was like, yeah, whatever you say, man. I'm just like taking furious notes. But yeah, that was super fun. The performance part of it was not super comfortable because we're crammed into like a wooden crate next to each other. But puppets, right? You're used to it. And the ones we used in the show didn't perform quite as well. They were built to last, not really to move, which is unfortunate. But at least the rehearsals were like, that was awesome.
Well, starting in Disney at around 2005 and 2011, you became a puppet specialist.
Yeah.
Can you talk a little bit about what that job entails?
Sure. If you've ever done any kind of shows, occasionally, they'll have people like maintenance choreographers or assistant directors come in and give notes throughout the process. And the puppet specialist's job was to do that for puppet-specific things. So we could go in and give each other notes, being like, hey, you're a little bit of an overhead lean, maybe straighten up your puppet on the next show. And, we just watch for each other and try to polish each other's shows. But we'd also help lead rehearsals. Occasionally, we would do these fun like company synergy events where we would just lead workshops for anybody at the company who's interested, and those were always really fun for me. Leading auditions, getting to weigh in on who's got the skills, or at least who is teachable enough to come in and like pick up on things quickly. But yeah, we get to go around, and what's beautiful about the specialist thing is I got to still do that for roles that I didn't necessarily or couldn't necessarily perform. So we got to help out. Technically, Aladdin, I didn't get to touch it before it went down. That was on my list, so I got to watch it a couple times, but I never gave notes because I didn't get to learn the show. But for Frozen, for like Olaf, because that was an Agva role at the time, so I wasn't allowed to perform it, but I could help them, perform it better, cleaner, prettier, that kind of stuff. And it let me, into rooms that I otherwise wouldn't get to go into, and it let me, expand my own knowledge so that if I'm met with those types of puppets in the future, then I know better how to handle them and how they work. And if they break, because they will break, the best way to hey, call in this guy to help fix this thing. Or knowing my limits as well, being like, that's definitely not my job. learning those bits is important too.
Yeah. Well, I think you touched on this a little bit, but as somebody who auditioned puppeteers and looked to hire puppeteers, and even at Disney and outside of Disney or whatever, what do you look for in a puppeteer who auditions for you?
I have almost zero expectation for anyone to know how to do it off the bat. So for me, if you show up and you're great, obviously awesome, hooray. But also, I always look for people who are teachable, who can take a note, and who are sort of physical by nature. So people who know how to move. Like a lot of people who got cross-trained into our shows later were dancers, and because they had such a command and mastery over their own bodies, the puppetry stuff, the physicality of puppets became very, very easy for them, because oh, I just do what I would normally do here, but I do it over here. I'm like, yes, that. And it's a hard thing to communicate to people who aren't used to doing that sort of thing. But yeah, it's looking for enthusiasm, looking for hey, can you take a note? Hey, can you take 1,000 notes? Because it's a hard and specific skill, and you're going to, it's going to take a lot of time, and it can be frustrating. So it's if you can just roll with how weird this is and how uncomfortable you're probably going to be. Endurance is another thing too. It's if I feel all right, this person can't hold up their arm for more than 10 minutes, then I'm a little worried, but even that can be trained up, right? Repetition. And I also know what Disney parks expected from puppeteers, I've learned after the fact, is not necessarily what the rest of the world expects as far as endurance is concerned. People can take breaks on a set. People can pop down a lot more often. But for what we had to do, we had to just go. And there was you can't stop, because then Mickey's not in that scene. So you have to be able to do it. So it's a little bit strength, mostly movement, mostly malleability. And then, yeah, just you still have to be a performer. You still have to be an actor, or at least have a bit of an actor's brain, I think, in order to do these things in a way that is readable, right? You have to, from your elbow and above, try to convince people that a character is having thoughts and emotions and intention and all those things. And if you don't understand what those pieces are, you're going to have a hard time puppeteering in general, right? It's it's a character, no matter what you're doing. And so, yeah. But I don't expect anybody to come in and be like, yeah, I'm great at crossed arm rods. I'm like, cool, neat.
Well, I wanted to talk about a very cool sort of Disney-related puppet that you got to do is the Jack Skellington puppet for the Nightmare Before Christmas concert. This puppet is amazing. If people have not seen this videos of this puppet, because I know it's been at Walt Disney World and it's made a few other appearances as well, but can you tell us a little bit about how this puppet works and how you landed the role to perform him for this concert?
Sure. It was after I had quit Disney. So I quit the parks, and I was on my honeymoon, and I got a call, at like whatever in the morning because I was in Germany and I was just like, okay, like it's a Disney number and I'm still all like grumpy and embittered and whatever. So I pick up the phone. I'm like, yeah, not a great way to start. Not a great way to start. And they're like, hey, what's your availability? This date, and this date. I'm like, I don't know why. And they're like, well, we can't answer unless you give us your availability. So I was like, okay, that's big, weird, and different. So I was like, I checked my calendar. I'm like, I will be back like that day. And they're like, great. I was like, yeah, I could do it. And then they told me what it was. Like, okay, so it's the Danny Elfman concert. It's this puppet, and you were recommended because of your background in puppet stuff at the parks, and they remembered you. So this was the events team, which is separate from like parkside events. It's a totally different division, it was nice that they thought of me. I was very grateful for that. And then I was like, right when I got back, I jumped into rehearsals, went to this like warehouse in downtown LA, and they just had him in bits and got to play with him a bit. I will say, the face is mostly pre-programmed, much to my chagrin. I wish I had my fingers on his mouth and blinks, to be honest. And yeah, I don't know. But it was cool. Like, so it's a two-person puppet, one person. So I was in the front. So I had legs, head, and body. So I'm in this harness, bulking all the weight. And from head to toe, he's 12 feet tall. Lighter than he looks, but still not particularly light, because if you lean too far, you're going down. And there were a couple scares where like people, like I had to hit my spot at a very specific time. So I almost ran over Steve Bartek because he didn't move. And I'm like, I can't slow down. My light's over there, buddy. I gotta go. My favorite thing about it is like we would see through this little mesh thing in the back of his suit. But it was fun. It was very, very fun. And I got to, share the stage with some personal heroes of mine, and they were all very cool and chill and just like, just doing a show, doing their jobs.
Yeah, and I'm sure it's easy for, like you're saying, for heroes to come up and chat with you when you have this amazing puppet. They're like, wow, how's this work? So
I will say most people ignored us, except for Billie Eilish was the sweetest human ever. So she saw us. We didn't have a lot of time to rehearse either, so not a lot of people had an opportunity to really come and chat with us. But I was just like down on the stage, and we were just getting our blocking right, making sure we're going to kick any like musicians' chairs or anything. And Billie Eilish like runs over, she looks up at the puppet, she's like, "Oh my God, it's my boyfriend!" Because she was there to sing for Sally for that concert. Killed it. She sounded great. But yeah, she was real sweet. She asked all kinds of questions. She's like, how does it work? I'm like, well, here's how you move the head. Here's how you do this. All this stuff. So it was just cool that she was excited and interested. And like Danny Elfman was busy. He was building the whole show. Like he's putting the whole thing together. So he's having to like watch sound people and do all these things. And everyone else was very polite. Greg Proops was also outgoing enough to like say hi to us. But I feel like everyone else was kind of like, here for the gig. See you later. And it wasn't, no one was rude. No one was off-putting. It was just kind of like, yeah, like they're famous. They're busy. They don't want to be bothered. I get it.
Yeah. Well, it's, as I said, it's a great puppet, and people haven't seen it. There's clips on YouTube where you can see it, and it's such a great it's a great puppet. It's just really amazing.
This is beautiful.
Yeah.
Yeah, and like that reaction, that was cool. That was a nice validating moment for me as a performer. And I was just like, oh, they're cheering, and it's because I'm standing here. That's cool.
Yeah. Well, you've done some commercials, and you did a Geico commercial. Can you talk about Eager Beaver and your work on that?
Sure. I did that a million years ago, and let's see. I think I just submitted for it, and I just talked about some stuff that I had done in my Disney experience and stuff. So they brought me in. There was an audition. I had to go, and my callback was in person. They had the beaver there. He didn't have his little glasses yet or anything, but it was falling apart on the inside. Apparently, this puppet had been used many times in the business over the years, and so the foam was just crumbling. He was very gross. I did not like touching it, but it was a good puppet. And it was fun. And then we got on set, and the guy who plays like the boss, or at least whoever was, running everything, was so funny. He did like every take he did just killed. And that was one of those moments where it's like, I need to be a better actor. Because it's like, I need to be like, I need to be able to keep up with this, because they encouraged improvisation. At that point, I had none under my belt whatsoever. And I was just like, I was falling behind. And there's like, I was so stressed about like, doing it on the day. And the director's trying to create like this fun environment of like, all right, everyone go home and learn this song, and you have to be off book by the time you get back. And we're all like, ha, 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 thinking he was kidding. We came back. He's like, all right, everybody, it's time to sing. And we're like, what? Had nothing to do with anything we were doing. He just wanted it for morale or whatever. And it was Mel Torme. That was a nightmare moment for me. I was like, I didn't know he was serious. But
That's where you learn the improv to
Yeah.
to fake it.
Now I'd be fine. I'd have a blast. But I was very nervous because I was like, well, this could, you're like every job. You're like, well, this might lead to other things. Who knows, right? It didn't, but it was cool. I liked it. I enjoyed it. It was fun, and I go back and watch it every now and then because I laugh. And they cut like 3 or 4 different versions of it too, because we had different jokes and different outs every time he left, and I can't find the other ones anymore. And they stopped answering my emails, so I probably will never see them.
They'll turn up on some YouTube video somewhere. Well, one thing that you've done a lot of, and this is really kind of what I would excited to talk to you about, is you've been part of several web series, and these are things that are just made to live on the web. And you and I even got to work on one together for a little bit.
Yeah.
The Remember Hour.
Yeah.
Can you talk a little bit about working with me on the No, can you? Because you did way more than I did. I just came in for a couple episodes. But the Remember Hour and how you got involved and sort of how, because you've done several of these. How do people approach you to doing this? Is it through networking? How do you get work on these web series?
It really is. Yeah, it really is just people I've worked with who have been kind enough to want to work with me again. At the time, I was recommended for the series by. I was initially supposed to be, I think, an assist on Remember Hour, because Aaron De La Pena was building all those puppets, and then he got down to the wire. So I remember he was exhausted when he got there. He's like, "Do you just want to do it?" I was like, "Okay." So that's how I got to be Rash. And that worked out. That was super fun. I really enjoyed that shoot, too. That was so much fun. They got really creative with how they got some of these shots. I remember there was an episode where, Russ Walco and I were just stuck in a box together for, I had to have been hours. It had to have been 2 hours, and just full of dust and just stuff coming down. We're sweltering and dying in there, but it was still funny. It was just fun. It was a good time. I remember season 2 was a little more truncated. I think they were a lot more ambitious in season 1. I think they had more of a budget, so they got to play more. And then season 2 was just kind of we just got to churn these out. We just got to make these things, which was fun. It was also fun.
I think I came in. I think I did season 2. I mean, as I said, I did one day, and it was just a couple episodes. But I was very impressed in they were doing a lot of scenery stuff, and it was a practical set. It wasn't oh, we're just going to film these on a green screen and drop in a background. It was physical sets and guest stars and props, and it was a lot of fun to do.
Yeah. They built the whole world. Super impressed. I loved it. I could have kept doing that one forever. That was really fun because it was just weird enough and just pop culture enough. I'm you've got all the pieces. Everything here should work. It was so fun. There was one day, and it was the only time I was like, oh man. And I didn't get mad about it till later because it was one of those beautiful challenge moments, right? It's okay, in one shot, you've got to walk over here. You got to pick up this football helmet, an actual football helmet, not a prop one. You got to walk it all the way over here, and you're going to put it down, and you're going to do this thing. So it was this nice, intricate, long shot thing. I was we can do it in one. Let's do it. And it took 3 or 4 tries. We got it on the last one, and I was so proud. And then when it came out, they still cut around it. It was you're kidding me. It was such a nightmare. And it was we could have just done it in 4 shots. I was very proud of myself, and I was looking forward to showing that to people, and I will never see it, but I know I did it.
Yeah. That is one of those things, though, you have to learn when you're working in this business is even if you do the most beautiful puppetry in the world, they can cut away from it and do, something else. So, you were also for Fail Army. You did Womp and Company. Can you talk about Womp and Co? Can you talk about that production and what you did on that?
Sure. Yeah. So Womp and Co was for Fail Army, and the deceit was that these are the people behind all the fail videos in the world. This puppet family are the people who actually put together all these things and send them out into the internet. So they do they have characters for quality control and IT and all that stuff. So it's they're running this place like a station. So there's a bunch of characters, but I play Razamort, who's a very sort of grounded character. I play Kronkin, who's a mad scientist. type, and then I do Freck, who is one of these little furry monsters in IT, who I loved so much because he was a little freak. And I got to work with some really fun puppeteers that I hadn't got to work with before for the first time on that. So that's where I got to meet Kelsey Brady and Sarah O. And my friend Genevieve is the one who brought me onto that, and she was a puppet captain for that, and she puppeteered a couple of the characters. But for the most part, she was doing a great job just taking care of us, which was awesome because a lot of the people on that shoot, like a lot of companies aren't used to shooting puppets. So she was, giving great advice, making sure that they were looking out for us. And but yeah, the whole thing was just delightful. Like the vibe on that set is like everyone was laughing, everyone was having a good time. There was like a couple days where it's like physically we were grumpy just because we were in pain because puppets, but overall the general feel was like, oh my gosh, I forgot that like it should feel like this. It should be this fun all the time. And I was like, yeah, because it can be. It's just a bunch of creative people, mucking around and having a good time. And then we made some really funny jokes on the fly. Like we were allowed to improvise and throw out suggestions, and we'd try them, like whether or not they stuck. It's like, yeah, we got 10 minutes. Let's do it. Let's set it up and let's work on the gag. Does it work? Yes, no, great, cool. Might it work? Try it again. And I love that environment, right? And I've been on sets where like they say things like, yeah, tell us whatever you want to try something, and then you do, and they're like, absolutely not. And you're like, got it, check, cool. But in this set, they meant it, so that was a lot of fun. I was hoping for a season 2, but then I think that whole section got shut down or something. They ended up laying a lot of people off, sadly. But yeah, Joven was our director for that, and he brought me. Actually, no, sorry. I mean, still G, but Joven brought me on for that one because G's the one who brought me on for the D&D one.
Stuff
which was
of
also,
Legends.
Yes, Stuff of Legends, which was also a Joven Shire project. And then because we worked well together on that, he brought both of us on to the next one. That's what it was.
And since we mentioned it, why don't you talk about Stuff of Legends? Because that was, if I'm remembering correctly, it was people were playing Dungeons and Dragons, but then sort of their adventures were acted out by puppets, right? Isn't that?
Yeah, it was being dramatized by puppet equivalents of the characters that they created, which was really fun. That was fun. That was, I say with a tone. No, it was a very fun time. I wish we had like 3 or 4 more puppeteers on it, but sometimes there's just limitations and they can't bring on more people. But we made it work. It was funny because the players they had at that table were hilarious, and we got to do some really fun like puppet gags. And there is a benefit, I think, to working with people who haven't worked with puppets before, in that they don't know what puppets can't do or like what we think puppets can't do. So they're just like, let's just try it. And like there were some fun surprise things that actually worked out because every puppeteer in the room was like, oh, please, God, no. And then we do it and it was great. And we're like, oh, cool. All right, neat. Like I would have recommended against some of these things. And then you see it when it's done. You're like, oh, hell yeah. Like that was great.
Awesome. Well, we're gonna talk about D&D a lot here in just a second because that seems to be a theme through a lot of your creative work. But I wanted to touch on Cucumber, who I sort of see as your signature puppet because he's definitely somebody you perform a lot. Where did the character of Cucumber come from?
He did not end up where he started. Correct either direction, I guess. So I really started building him because like I need an audition puppet. Because I was like, I want to work more outside of the parks. I want to figure stuff out. And so like when I initially designed him, he was gonna be kind of this like sad emo type character. Like he had a little watermelon nose and all these things. And then and I did make him a little Cthulhu mug that I never ever used, but I hand drew like this creepy little Cthulhu thing on it. It's in a box somewhere. But so he had initially was gonna kind of just be like this sort of little quiet guy. And then, oh my gosh, it's G's fault. So Genevieve did the first version of that one puppet show, and that was the first time I had to come up with a personality for Cucumber, really. And when I panic, I turn more into me than I think anyone deserves. So it's like this really cranked up, no filter, filthy mouthed version of myself that is more like hedonistic, fun loving only kind of monster. He's a little jerk. So like that panic of like having to have a character right now, and then that stuck. And it still got refined. Like I'll go back and listen to videos from like 6 years ago. Sometimes I'm like, ooh, yeah, no, nope. But yeah, and so Cucumber became my character mostly because he's the only puppet I owned. Like I don't own a lot of puppets, so it's just like, well, that's the one I got, so this is what I'm going to use. And we ended up using him for Perception Studio, where he's been sort of locked in forever.
Well, let's say that's a perfect segue right into Perception Studio. How it came to be, like how this online streaming juggernaut came to be.
Oh boy, do I wish we were a juggernaut. It was around the time that we all left Disney. So like 2017 when Disney Junior closed, I didn't want to stop doing puppet stuff because I know like if I don't practice it, I'm gonna atrophy all my cool puppet muscles, and I don't want to be bad at it. I wanted to keep my skills up. So one, I wanted to puppeteer. I wanted to keep puppeteering with my friends, people that I like. And I also love games. And so it's sort of like these things danced around each other for a while. So I'd be like, guys, I just got 4th edition D&D. We should learn how to play it. And I was like, all right, sure, whatever. And they came over and like just distracted, not picking up on the rules or whatever. I was like, all right, that's fine. That's fair. We had like 2 sessions or something. I was like, all right. Okay, I got to think about this. And then I was like, oh, wait, they're all show people. If I make it a show, they will show up and do the thing. So I approached my best friend from high school, Ryan Kaiser, who is a little more tech brain. He knows how to like build stuff. He's a fabricator type guy. And Art Vega, who was, a puppet specialist for me when I was coming up, and then a fellow puppet specialist later. And we performed together on a bunch of stuff forever. Is one of my best friends. He was best man at my wedding. And he's great. And so I was like, hey, guys, here's an idea. Puppets playing D&D. Eh? And they're like, yeah, okay. So then we set it up in a garage, Orion's garage, which had a bunch of stuff in it. So we had to clear out a little corner of this garage. There's like a workbench behind us. The first episode, I think, is lost, ? But it was like 2 sawhorses, a slab of some sort of surface. We threw like some fabric on it. I have a collection of metal coins because I'm a dork, and so I scattered those. We put a sword on the table, tried to make it pretty. We had like 1 light. We were sharing 1 microphone. We didn't understand Twitch yet, but we're just like, let's just do it. We'll learn from it. And you gave us our first lights. You did.
I did.
You did, the cowboy lights. I haven't passed them forward yet. They're still at the studio, but I will pass them forward. But yeah, you gave us our first set of 3-point lighting, because before that we just had like 1 spotlight in the garage. And so then, yeah, we did that first show. We're like, all right, almost all of that was terrible. How do we make it less terrible? And then we just kind of kept going. And the basic idea is Ryan, the human, is trying to run a real, actual game of Dungeons and Dragons. And we, the puppets, are in earnest trying to play, but because puppets, the characters are very distractible and prone to riffing and jokes and all those things. Mostly dirty jokes. That's mostly my fault. But it's been really, really fun. And I think we've hit a stride because we've been doing it now for so long that it's like we are sort of this machine. And if one of us, has to pop out for a gig or has to do this other thing, like, we can plug in with guests. And then guests also like pick up on the vibe because now we are so sort of cohesive in what we do. They're like, oh, that's the game. That's what we're doing. That's what we're playing. And we pitched this show to a larger Twitch station known as Hyper RPG. I had some friends on that channel. And way, way, way back when, I got to do puppetry. So there's a voice actor, tremendous voice actor, kindest man in the business. His name is Darren DePaul. And he and I met at a game night at a mutual friend's place. And then he was up at, it was before Hyper RPG existed. This was at Geek and Sundry. And he was like, hey, we need a guest for the How To Squad. Can you come? And I was like, yeah, sure. So I called out from work and I went up there. So I was teaching puppetry to Amy Dallin and Whitney Moore, and they had a show where just people would come on and teach them something. And I was like, this is great. This is super fun. So I taught some puppets, chatted for like an hour. And that's where I met Zach and Lucas, who are 2 brothers who later went on to open and start Hyper RPG. So way later, I was like, yeah, we met that one time. And hey, I have an idea for a show for you guys, because they had, a studio. Everything was ready to go. And I was like, hey, puppets in D&D, what do you think? They're like, that sounds great. And at the time, they just didn't have time for it. And they're like, figure it out, and then we'll see what we can do. I was like, okay. So that's why we started doing it on our own. And we did it for, 3 months. And then they're like, oh, you figured it out. Yeah, come over. So we did a show for them for about a year. And he earned some change, I think. And we guested on some other shows for them and stuff. And then we came back and we're just like, all right, we can do it. So we did it, and we just kept growing. And I think where we are now is a big testament to Art, because he's a lot. He has a better sense of like ambition and where to put things into the next stage. So it's like I was pretty content. I'm like, no, we can't leave the garage. Like the garage is safe. And he's like, no, we need a studio space. Like if we're gonna make it look like we need it to look. So like we got a studio space like at a business center. We've been there ever since. I almost said here because I just moved my booth and I still feel like it's there. I had a transportational moment. And yeah, sorry, that's a very long roundabout way of kind of saying how that stuff happened. But mostly it's Perception Studio is a place where we want to play around with our friends, have a good time, laugh, make other people laugh, and also help other people create their own shows. So like, for instance, we have some friends who are just like, hey, we have an idea. We have a crew. We have a team. But we just need a place to do it. And we're like, yeah, come over. We have all this stuff and we're not doing anything right now. So here, show up. And we're also, giving people the opportunities like, hey, like I've never run a D&D show before. I'm like, cool, try it. Like, come on, we'll put it on a day that's very low stakes, because every month we do a thing called like Studio Days, which is like a fundraiser thing where we just do like a silly one-pager one-shots. Like you don't really have to know how those games work. You just kind of show up and play. It's turned into a really nice home, I think, for everybody. And I like it a lot. It's fun. I hope I get to keep doing it.
Is it set up as a business? Like, do you have like LLC or what? I mean, you know what I mean? Like, is there all that kind of stuff?
Yes, we are an LLC. Nobody gets paid. Everything goes right back into paying rent and keeping electricity and stuff. But we are working toward that. And the company, we also we design and fabricate characters as well. So we build puppets and we build one-off props and just kind of strange stuff that people need because they know we can do things. And when those things happen, I'm usually the 2D design, 3D sculpture guy, and then an extra hand for other stuff because I'm not so great at patterning, but I'm decent at designing. So.
Yeah, so it's kind of like you have this show, but you're using like, oh, we can build puppets and we can build props and stuff to fund being able to do this show. Is kind of like how Jim Henson used to do the commercials so that he could fund the Muppets or the other things. So it's, but still all under the same umbrella. So it's great. It's a great, for somebody starting out, that's a great kind of, path to take to get to do what you want to do. As somebody who has streamed a lot on Twitch, what are your tips for building an audience on Twitch or other places? Just because there's a lot of puppeteers who, might see that as an avenue.
Sure. In general, consistency, right? That's the biggest thing for streaming on any platform. Set your time and date and just stick with it. So like we have a lot of fluctuation, but the one thing that doesn't change is Wednesday nights, 7:30 p.m. That's our main show. That's our show all the time, always. And even if it's a different show, like so we get a sponsored stream, like somebody's like, hey, we've made this game. Will you play it for us? We're like, yes, but then we'll put that on Wednesday so that everybody actually sees it. But then, you just set your time slots and start small, start digestible, because we did one night a week for probably a year before we started adding more and getting more complicated. We did like one board game night that we all regretted because we all left so tired. Again, my fault, because I was like, Rising Sun is dope. It's a great game. Yeah, show up. Listen to your audience, but not too much. People will want you to do anything and everything. So if it aligns with something that you also would like to do, then take it as good advice. If it's like, yeah, that sounds cool, but that's not for me. People can tell online when you're not into what you're doing. Always. So like if you're not actually passionate about it, maybe that's not the way to go. As far as other tips for like puppet specific things, and I think in general, it's like setting up any puppet thing, make sure you got lights, a nice microphone, or a decent-ish mic. If you're just starting out, who cares? Just do it. But like, if you can get a decent microphone, if you can get some nice lighting, if you can get, definitely have a monitor for yourself and a camera and, have the stuff. Learn Twitch, but Twitch isn't that hard. Recommending starting with something free like OBS if you're going to start streaming, because it lets you plug your camera in, do all that stuff. So learn some software, but like neither expect nor put that on yourself to try to make it perfect on the first go, second 100th go. Because like you're just going to learn as you go. Like, oh, that thing looks bad. How do I fix that thing? And if you just kind of like one thing at a time, eventually you're going to stop worrying about all of those. And it's like, great, now where can we go? What's the next thing? Like, what's the next goal? How can we improve what we're doing? And a lot of that will be based on need, right? Like, what kind of show are you making? If it's a chat show, you need a lot less. If it's like a show with lots of moving parts, you have to figure out how to make those work on that platform. Having friends helps. Getting people who are on the same page as you is very important, I think. It's hard to do by yourself. Lots of streamers do it. I don't know how they do it. You do a lot of stuff solo. I'm like, there's no way. There's no way. I can't motivate myself like that to, like, I need the friend pod to get me out of my hole to do things.
Well, yeah, it's maddening, and the thing I will say is, I totally agree. I'm 100% a person who believes, and I've been this way since podcasting, is just use what you have and improve as you go along. Just keep doing it. Like, I have to remind myself this because even though I've done this for, since 2019 was really when I started, like, okay, I want to do a regular live stream, is even this many years on, you're going to hit a button and the camera's not going to click over. You know what I mean? Like,
Yep.
it's inevitable that this is going to happen. And usually Toily will lose his mind when that happens. And that's me losing my mind. But I also, it's like, you got to keep in mind, it's like, that's going to happen. That's technology and it's not
Yeah.
always going to work,
I was gonna say, I am the least technically brained of our group. Like, I understand audio, but only for my individual purposes, and I'm useless to a studio setting. And I feel terrible. And every time they try to teach me, I'm like, I don't know what you're saying. I try. So that's something I'm trying to work on this year, is to be more of like an actual help around the studio for when other people need a break.
Yeah, it's so crazy because when you start streaming like this, you get into groups and Facebook groups or whatever of other people who are streaming and or Discord groups and like, oh, what are you doing? Oh, you're doing this. And then for puppeteers, it's really like, yeah, we can do all this stuff, but we have to do it with one less hand than everybody else because you're puppeteering at the same time. And like, I don't think even other streamers, like one of my best friends, Dan Ring, he's a musician and he streams live on Twitch all the time. And when I'll come to him with a problem, he's like, oh, well, yeah, you just do this. And it's like, yeah, but you have both hands that you can reach and do that. I have one hand that has to remain on camera the whole time.
Yup. We had to solve for that a lot for our shows. So at our studio, so we have this raised stage for puppet things. We sit in these like gamer chairs that are really low to the ground, but we also have like monitors scattered across, hanging off the side of the table. D&D Beyond, which is like this digital D&D service, was a godsend, because before that we had to like tape up our character sheets and still like try to roll dice or like yell at Ryan to roll dice for us. And so now we can do all of that with just like one hand and then come back and do everything that we're doing. So that's helpful. So now we have like so we've got like a little mounted arm with an iPad. So anything we need to interact with, like the chat, we can still mess with the chat. We can like split screen also. Hooray, iPad, for figuring that out. So I can have two things up at once. So I usually have like character sheet, chat, and then down there is monitor. We usually have a beverage or two handy. Like, it's become a comfortable thing, but that's with lots of time figuring out, what do we want, what do we need. You mentioned Dan Ring, and that was a project of Dan Ring's, was the first thing I think I ever did outside of Disney. Was that Romeo and Juliet music video.
Romeo and Juliet. I completely forgot about that. Yeah.
That's on my reel. I really liked that. That was fun.
Yeah, I think I was brought in the last moment. Dan was like, can you direct this? And I was like, I have never directed anything. Like, why? And he's like, oh, you'll be great. And it's like my whole world of directing and just things working on is Mystery Science Theater, where it's one camera and the camera never moves, and like you may have different people come in and out. So I don't know. Yeah, that was a fun project. I don't always remember that project. I'll say it that way. But it came out great. Like, it was a lot of fun when at the end of it, One other thing I wanted to ask about, and this is purely selfish, but it may help other people out there, because this is something when I live stream, how, and you kind of said it like, listen to the chat, but don't take it necessarily everything. But like, how do you strike that balance of, because you have to acknowledge the chat because there's these people out there, but you also don't want it to take over the whole show where you're just sitting there. I mean, I guess some people have very successful shows where they just respond to every single comment that comes in. But what's sort of your advice? What works for you in terms of relating to these people who are watching and just chatting?
I think that depends on which show it is. So for like Wednesday, disruption is the name of the game. So we've spent minutes, dozens of minutes, just like, hey, yeah, whatever, D&D. Yeah, we're going to talk about this thing that's in the chat. But I do think important thing is always acknowledge, right? If you get a follow, if you get a subscription, if somebody's supporting you in any way, like if you got rated, like call that out. Be grateful because that doesn't happen to everybody. Because, there are people who have been streaming for years and they still only get like 1 or 2 viewers or no viewers and they're just streaming because they want to. But, I think letting people know that you want them to be there, it's an exchange. Streaming is a conversation, even if you are doing like a solo show or whatnot. Or something you do is like see something in the chat, be inspired by that, take that thing so that they'll be like, oh, they saw my comment, but it wasn't necessarily a direct conversation. You're like, you make like a joke that they made or be like, but usually we'll just call them out because I think it's fun. It's cool. It's harmless. But we do have shows, I would say, that have been more grounded where it's harder to interrupt for those moments where it's like we're like usually the games that don't have the puppets in them, we try to make them tonally different. So like I used to run a D&D show called Solon's Legacy where it was all humans at the table. I was the DM and we played it pretty straight. It was role play heavy. And so like we would only interrupt if it was like, hey, they've dropped a character or hey, they're interrupting the story for this. And occasionally if something just cracked us up, we'd have the chat available and be like, very funny. And then we go back to it. But also I feel like if people are enjoying what you're doing, they'll pick up on that and they won't take it personally. But if you can't do it during the stream, like during the activity, like do it at the end. Be like, hey, like I saw your comments. These were great. Thank you so much. Or like that's another great purpose for a thing like Discord. And we started to fold that in. Like when we run out of time and we need to get stuff done, we're like, hey, any questions we didn't answer, put them in the Discord and we'll do like a little talkback show for you. So you guys can actually see like, yeah, we value and we see this, but we also like, if we only do that, we don't have a show anymore. So it's like, it really is, it's hard. And we're still figuring out that balance. And I think it's different every night because sometimes it's real quiet. So it's just us. And sometimes I feel like relying on the chat as a place to joke around has become a crutch for me because I really like playing with them. So when they're quiet, I'm like, oh no, I have to pay attention. Oh no. But yeah, I don't know. Also, every community is going to be different, right? The vibes are different. Ours are very kind of like boisterous and like in your face because our character is very boisterous in your face. So like they've found like people in us that behave similarly to us and have a lot of fun with that. But we've also found there's like different cultures for different shows because we had a few ongoing, right? So Wednesdays, crazy pants. Tuesdays, somewhere in the middle. We usually get like all the interactions are usually on the sillier side, but the chat is usually a lot more like, oh, I really like this story. I like this, like the way this is unfolding. So I'll be quiet and enjoy. And then Mondays is a talk show with the chat that is designed to be that. That's the Welcome Party, which is like a pop culture show that a friend of the studio, JPG, puts on. But yeah, I don't know. I guess my answer is you'll figure it out and it'll be great and it'll be fun.
Yeah, well, I think it's always people like the acknowledgement, and it's like, hearing your name on the radio. You know what I mean? Like people are like, hey, that's my name. People love that. So if you can give that to them, you might as well do it. You also worked on a film called Abruptio, and I hear you have quite a tale of adventure of how this happened. So can you tell us a little bit about the production, about what the movie's about, and then sort of your experience working on it?
Sure. Yeah. So the movie is about a character named Les Hackle who's very down on his luck. His life is always falling apart. He's got an overbearing mother, all these things. And then horror ensues. But the main deceit of this film is that everyone is a puppet. That is also the tagline of the movie is everyone is a puppet because he's being manipulated by forces outside his control. But every character is a realistic looking puppet that is sculpted and cast in latex. And they're also life-sized. And at the very, very beginning, there were only 2 puppeteers on the project. And then the week after I joined, I was the only puppeteer on the project. So I was every single character and every single shot with the exception of exactly 2. Now, having now seen the film, I was like, that wasn't me and I wasn't there and I'd never saw that before in my life. So some stuff got left in. But for the most part, I was there for everything. And it was the most physically taxing thing I've ever done puppetry-wise. The sculpts were really fun, and also a lot of the most, if not all, of the characters were sculpted by Jeff Farley, who is like he makes a lot of like horror props and stuff like that. So they have a very distinct look to them. Some of the characters moved a little better than others. So like my favorite, there's a character named Richter who's like this kind of he's a cop character, but I got to do like a bucket list shot for me, which was having the character smoke. I don't know why it's my favorite. It's just very, very fun. So I had these silicone gloves on and stuff. We got to have him smoke and talk and do all this stuff. But yeah, I got on that because it was a stage manager of ours from Disney. She was like, hey, I've got some friends making a film. Are you down? I'm like, yes. So I went and That was in 2017, and it just came out just recently. So it did a bunch of like horror festivals and stuff like that. It's doing pretty well. It's very weird. It's very like it embraces its B movie roots in every way. Some of the voice cast is incredible because they recorded the lines so long ago. So like Robert Englund's in it. I think it's technically Sid Haig's last movie. Jordan Peele, a bunch of other folks who I didn't get to meet. I just did everything to track. I never saw the whole script either. So they only gave me like my sides for the day, and I'm just going off of audio. So I had to try to piece together the movie in my brain. And if you do watch it, you will understand my confusion because we shot nothing in sequence. My first day on set was at an abandoned carnival that had been transformed into like a horror location some times ago. And then the people who ran that place decided to squat there when they were supposed to leave. So we got there and there's like a whole community of people there trying to like keep us out and making threats and all that kind of fun stuff. We found like a spent rifle casing on the bumper cars when we were walking around. It was insane. It was very fun. And then sometimes very not fun, but it was I got to drive a car while being at the bottom of a car while puppeteering. That was cool. Yeah, it was neat. And Anchor Bay is coming back from the dead, and one of the first two movies they bought was Abruptio. So that's kind of cool. People are going to see it.
Excellent. Well, I'll have to check it out. Well, I wanted to talk about a show that you've done a couple times and that we did a couple months ago, and that's That One Puppet Show. Our friend Genevieve Flati putting that together. Can you talk about working on that show and sort of developing pieces for that show? Because I will say the show we just did, your Bones in the Ocean piece, I loved. I just was telling other people who book puppet slams and stuff, it's like, you got to have this piece on because this piece is great. But can you talk about working on that show and creating pieces for it?
Yeah, sure. So I'll talk about the first one first, which was many, many moons ago, like over 10 years ago, I think, because all three of us, Art, Genevieve, and myself, were still at Playhouse Disney. No, Disney Junior. It was Disney Junior. And she was just like, hey, like, I really want to do the show. Can we do the show? And we're both just like, yeah. Because that's just our personality. I was like, yeah, sure, why not? Let's do it. And so, like, I think it wasn't a lack of enthusiasm. I think it was a lack of outward enthusiasm, which I've learned to work on. But I was like, no, like, I really want to play, sure. But, like, it was one of those things that was also scarier for me the first go-round because I still, at that point, had no improvisational training. So the cast that ended up doing it was, like, 50% really strong puppeteers and 50% really strong improvisers. And you would think, like, plugging those two things together would just work itself out. And I don't know if it did, but it was really, really fun. Because we had, like, Amber Llewellyn, who's now, like, she's now a resident at Groundlings. Like, she's in a bunch of their shows. She's funny. And, like, Genevieve is obviously, like, a nice middle of the Venn diagram for both of those skills. But it was mostly like quick little sketches the first time. So she wrote some jokes. We did those jokes. We built some puppets for those jokes. I say Art built the majority of those puppets for that, and everything else G had sourced herself from the All Puppet Players, Sean McNamara, who now is in Arizona. We did a bunch of shows with them at the Maverick, and that's where Genevieve and I met. The first one was very fun, very scary. We did it at the IO West right before it got shut down. And I remember we met Janitor from Scrubs. And the other guy on the same team was David Kruckner. I can't say his name. I never could, and I never will. Two very funny men. Anyway, they're on an improv team together, and they were on after us. And like, yeah, like, what are you guys doing? We're like, puppets. They're like, cool. They were very nice, very supportive. But I was like, I shouldn't be here. I'm just sweating. And I messed up the song, which you gave me a hard time about this go around when we did like the Fievel Goes West song. Nope, the other one, American Tail. Anyway, the second one was a lot more ambitious, and I loved the idea better, getting to show off more facets of puppetry in a more broad scope. Because the first one was all just comedy, just snappy comedy, very short. It was maybe like 35, 40 minutes. But this one, when she talked about it again, she's like, yeah, like I want to do it. I want to get a bunch of people together. I want people to like create their own stuff. I just want to give them a place to make something. I'm like, yeah, that's super my vibe. And I liked the fact that, the first act was all stage and the second act was all monitor. And I think, and I don't even think it was planned this way, but I think it ran the full gamut of like the silliest things, the dumbest things you can do with a puppet to like some of the more subtle and beautiful things you can do with a puppet. And everything in between. And it was really cool to see that come together because, like, I didn't even know I was going to do a thing until later because she was like, well, do you have any ideas? I was like, well, there's this thing that I wanted to do for Gen Con, but, like, 2 years from now because I don't have time to really work on it. She's like, you're doing it because if you've met Genevieve, she will make up her mind and yell at you until you do things.
Yes.
And I felt kind of bad because I didn't get to participate too much in the fabrication stuff. Kelsey Brady was in town and she ended up like painting the boat, rigging up the skeletons. She built most of the pirate puppet. And Art also helped out a whole bunch with that too, just getting stuff up and ready so that when I got there, I could just be like, hey, hold these things, do this like this. And it came together nicely. It's something I'd still like to polish, but I also just loved that as a viewer. I liked being done with my thing and getting to run into the house and watch everything else because it was like it was super fun. I liked getting to play with everybody else too because I feel like, the studio is great, but we're also a little siloed. We play with the same people a lot of the time. And it was cool just to be like, yeah, oh yeah, I'll help with your thing. Sure, I'm an extra body. Yeah, put me in. Let's go. And it was fun watching. Always fun. I died with the freaking Helen Keller story you did is my favorite. But I also really like Matt McGee. I saw that bit that he did in at Gen Con where I was just like, oh, I have to step up my game. Oh, remember that I should make pretty things too. So I saw that, and G was looking for performers, and that was like my only other actual contribution was like, you should have Matt McGee in your show, and he came and he killed, and it's beautiful. And he's saying he's going to make like a full length with all like the vignette shorts that he's doing. So I want to try and get out there when I can.
Yeah.
Anyway, that was a long way to say it was cool. I had very little to do with it. I mostly just showed up. That show wasn't a show, then it was a show, and then it was over is kind of how it felt because I was just like, sure, like I'm in. I don't know what that means, and I don't think anybody knew what that meant until very close to opening night because I didn't even see all the acts until the show was up.
You have built this really kind of great community of artists around you. I mean, we've talked Art Vega, we talked Genevieve Flati, we talked Kelsey Ann Brady. Can you talk about how important that is to build up sort of this community of artists and friends to help your puppetry work?
Yeah, it's what makes it fun. Because like I don't know, I like play. Almost all of my interests are like board games, tabletop RPGs, like hanging out, making stuff. Like that's what I like to do. So I think for me, it's like it's hard. It's almost impossible for me to create in a vacuum, and for it to feel like play, I don't like being by myself either. And also just I like to spend time with people who support me and also need me in some capacity to do the things that I can do and the same way, right? It's all about supporting each other and having each other's back, but also just having fun. It's fun. You want to surround yourself with fun people who like know what they're doing, like what they're doing, and want to be there. And I think that's been the best part. Is like I think we're always shocked, right? Because like we'll be like, yeah, like you're always welcome to come play, and they're like, yeah, we're down. I'm like we can't pay anybody. Like no, it sounds fun. Like and then they come back and you're like, are you sure? Because we can't pay anybody. They're like, yeah, no, yeah, we'll come play because it's fun. Like we like being there. We like having a good time, and that still boggles the mind to me. I'm like I almost feel apologetic when people come in, but like we've managed to create a really comfortable, fun, like safe space for people to come and just do stuff.
Because I don't know, like I feel sometimes, I mean, when I'm streaming here by myself and my wife will help run comments and stuff sometimes during live streams, but it's very solitary. And it is when you get to play with other people, it's so rewarding and it's so much fun. And, I think you've built up a great community around you that where it's always fun. Maybe not always, but a lot of times it's fun. Yeah.
It's a solid 90%. It's still good. That's a good percent.
Yeah, it is. It's an A. Well, I always like to wrap up these interviews by asking, what has been the highlight of your puppetry career so far?
Whoa. I think the thing I always still come back to is Bear in the parks. I think that was because that was rewarding for many reasons. Like it was the most challenging puppet I've ever done. It was the most fun I had, like figuring out like, okay, these are my confines. How do I play within this thing that I'm locked into, right? It was also, I think, the most exponential growth that I had as a puppeteer because that was my first real, like, not real puppet, but first, like, standard hand and mouth style puppet thing. So it's like I learned the most doing it. It was the hardest thing I've ever done. It was some of the most fun I've ever done. And Bear was able to do like meet and greets sometimes after the show for Make-A-Wish and stuff. So I also got to make an impact that wasn't just Dance Monkey Dance. I got to have these really beautiful moments with kids and families, and I got to do that with other characters, but they don't emote in the same way that a puppet can, that bear can, and like they know him, right? And so it was cool to be able to give that to people, and like just all in all, like it was a very fun show. Very good time. And like that's one thing where it's like I would drop anything to go do something like that again. But yeah, and I mean there's been a lot of really everything I've done there's been a highlight, so it's hard to pick. So I'll change it next time. I don't know. But it is a favorite for sure.
Excellent. Well, Danny Montooth, thank you so much for taking the time to be on the show today.
Thanks for having me. This was super fun. And come play.
Many thanks to Danny Montooth for being on the show. For links to some of the things we discussed, check out the show notes for this episode number 95, over at underthepuppet.com. And if you'd like to hear even more of my talk with Danny Montooth, download the free Under the Puppet app for iOS and Android and click on the gift icon in the listing for this episode. I'd also like to send out a special thank you to all the Saturday Morning Media Patreon patrons who help make this show possible. Patreon patrons at the producer level and above who get a special shout out are Eve Cunning, Kathy Crawford, Tony Urbano, Brandy, David Akers, Paul, Scott Armstrong, Vicky Sebring, and Ricky Chavez. To become a patron, visit patreon.com/Saturday Morning Media. And thank you for your support. Well, that's going to do it for this episode of Under the Puppet. If you have questions, suggestions, or feedback about the show, call our voicemail line at 818-806-9604. Or click the Call the Show button in the free Under the Puppet app for iOS and Android. You can also send feedback via email to underthepuppet@gmail.com, or you can connect with the show on Instagram or Facebook by searching for Under the Puppet. And don't forget to tell a friend about the show. This episode featured music by Dan Ring and was expertly edited by Steven Staver. Thank you so much for listening. Under the Puppet is copyright 2024 Saturday Morning Media Grandpa Choco executive producer, all rights reserved. www.saturdaymorningmedia.com. Under the Puppet proudly presents The Adventures of Timmy the Tooth Reunion. In this almost 90-minute video, you will hear great stories from the cast and crew who brought this amazing puppet show to life. Plus, you'll see never-before-seen artwork and exclusive behind-the-scenes video. Under the Puppet's Timmy the Tooth Reunion is available right now at timmy.underthepuppet.com. You've been listening to Saturday Morning Media. Stay tuned. We'll be right back.